The desert heat in Dubai is unforgiving, hovering near 42 degrees Celsius, but the two men standing at the commercial port in June 2023 did not mind the temperature. They had just endured a 7-hour flight from London, fueled by adrenaline and the promise of a massive payday. In front of them stood a massive steel shipping container, battered by salt, air and travel. To the casual observer, it was just another metal box in a sea of international trade, but to these two men, that steel box represented 6 months of high-stakes logistical planning, sleepless nights, and millions of pounds in illicit assets. They had the paperwork, they had the keys. In approximately 30 seconds they would crack the seal and swing those heavy doors open. They expected to see the culmination of a master plan, a paper fortune in automotive engineering, ready for the black market. But they did not know that their lives were effectively over before they even touched the handle. To understand the sheer gravity of the catastrophe awaiting them in that container, we have to rewind the clock. We need to go back to the grey, rainy streets of East London and into the mind of a 29-year-old named Wahed Ysef. Wahed was not your typical chaotic street criminal. He was an unauthorized entrepreneur. Operating out of Ilford, he looked at the world differently than you or I. When you walk past a glossy, £80,000 Range Rover parked in a driveway, you see a luxury vehicle. When Wahed saw that same car, he did not see a vehicle. He saw a catalogue of inventory. He saw an engine worth $8,000, a transmission worth $5,000, and thousands more in electronics, body panels, and interiors. He realized that while a stolen car is a liability that can be tracked, a dismantled car is a goldmine that vanishes into the supply chain. From December 2022 to May 2023, Wahed orchestrated what he believed to be an untouchable system. It relied on a technological vulnerability known as the relay attack. It is a terrifyingly simple method. Modern luxury cars constantly broadcast a signal searching for their key fob. If your keys are sitting on a hallway table, a thief standing outside can use a specialized amplifier device to grab that faint signal, boost it, and beam it to the car. The vehicle believes the owner is standing right next to the door. The locks click open, the ignition fires up, and the car is driven away without a single window being smashed. But Wahed knew that acquiring the asset was only step one. To industrialize this process, he recruited specialists. Mohammed Bukhari, 28, handled the high-risk transport, moving the hot vehicles immediately after acquisition. Stanley Vanderberg, 25, managed deliveries. They brought these vehicles to the heart of the operation, a nondescript industrial unit in Braintree, Essex. From the outside, it looked like a legitimate business. Inside, it was a mechanical slaughterhouse. Wahed employed a crew of skilled dismantlers who could strip a luxury SUV down to its skeleton in under 4 hours. It was a race against the sunrise. By the time the owner woke up to find an empty driveway, their beloved car was already reduced to a pile of parts, wrapped, labeled, and ready to be shipped halfway across the world. For 6 months, the machinery of Wahed's illicit enterprise hummed with terrifying efficiency. The syndicate moved over 70 vehicles, valued at nearly £3 million, without a single significant hitch. They had become comfortable, perhaps even complacent, believing their methods were undetectable. But in the world of high-stakes theft, perfection is an illusion. All it takes is one technological anomaly to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. That anomaly arrived in May 2023, disguised as a standard Land Rover parked on a quiet driveway in Essex. When the vehicle was taken in the dead of night, the owner followed the standard protocol, filed a police report, and contacted the insurance company. The car's factory tracker showed no movement, likely disabled or blocked by the thieves immediately after acquisition. Weeks passed in silence. The trail went cold, and the victim likely resigned themselves to the fact that their property was gone forever. But technology can be unpredictable. Suddenly, after weeks of dormancy, the Land Rover's GPS system woke up. It sent a single, crisp signal pinging off a satellite. It was not moving down a highway or heading toward a port. It was stationary, sitting quietly inside an industrial unit in Braintree. This was the break Essex Police needed. In a typical scenario, law enforcement would mobilize a tactical team, breach the perimeter, recover the asset, and arrest whoever was unlucky enough to be holding the wrench. It is a standard grab-and-go operation. However, the detectives on this case paused. They looked at the location, a secluded warehouse large enough to hold significant inventory, and realized this was not just a hiding spot for a single car. This was a processing hub. If they raided now, they might catch a few low-level workers, but the heads of the snake would slip away. They chose a more difficult path: patience. Instead of sirens and battering rams, they deployed unmarked vehicles and surveillance teams. They transformed into shadows, watching the facility from a distance, documenting the rhythm of the operation. What they witnessed confirmed their suspicions of a sophisticated criminal hierarchy. They observed the arrival of fresh vehicles under the cover of darkness. They tracked the movements of a specific white van that seemed to act as a shuttle for parts. Slowly, the faces of the network came into focus. They identified Wahed Ysef directing the flow, Mohammed Bukhari managing logistics, and Stanley Vanderberg handling the supply. The police were building a comprehensive map of the organization, connecting the dots between the street-level thefts and the international export strategy. But the true turning point came when surveillance teams noticed a flurry of activity around a large shipping container parked at the facility. Over several nights, officers watched through long-range lenses as the crew loaded the metal box with engines, transmissions, and front-end assemblies. The police knew exactly what was inside: the remains of at least 7 high-value vehicles. They watched the syndicate seal the doors and arrange for a freight company to collect it. The destination on the manifest was clear: Dubai. At this precise moment, the investigation reached a critical crossroads. The police had enough evidence to intercept the container, seize hundreds of thousands of pounds in stolen property, and arrest the crew before the truck even reached the highway. It was the safe play. It was the expected play. But the investigators decided that simply catching the criminals was not enough. They wanted to dismantle the network psychologically as well as physically. They allowed the container to leave the facility, trailing it all the way to the UK port, where they prepared to execute a maneuver that was equal parts brilliant and devious. At the port, the intervention was surgical. Acting on instructions from the investigative team, port authorities pulled the specific container out of the loading queue just hours before it was scheduled to be hoisted onto the cargo ship. When officials cracked the seal and peered inside, they found exactly what the surveillance suggested: a treasure trove of stolen automotive engineering. It was packed tight with engines, gearboxes, and body panels, all stripped from vehicles stolen across 3 counties. Every serial number was a direct link to a victim. Every part was irrefutable proof of a conspiracy. In a standard investigation, this is where the evidence bag comes out, the container is impounded, and the warrants are signed. But Essex Police had a different endgame in mind. They documented every inch of the interior, photographing the serial numbers and mapping the packing layout to use as leverage in court later. Then, they ordered the unthinkable. They instructed the port workers to unload everything. Piece by piece, the stolen fortune was removed until the steel floor was bare. Once the container was completely hollow, they closed the heavy doors, applied a fresh, official-looking seal, and placed the empty metal shell back into the export line. The container was loaded onto the ship, and as it drifted away from the British coast, it carried nothing but air. It was a Trojan horse, designed not to infiltrate a city but to shatter the confidence of a criminal syndicate. For 2 weeks, that empty box sailed across the ocean. During that time, Wahed and his crew operated with a terrifying arrogance. They had no idea their flagship shipment was a ghost vessel. They continued to steal, strip, and plan, believing their pipeline was secure. Wahed likely tracked the shipment's progress online, watching the little digital dot move closer to the Middle East, calculating his profits, unaware that he was staring at a zero-sum game. The police used this time to finalize their strike, coordinating with teams across Essex, Hertfordshire, and Bedfordshire. They needed absolute synchronization. The date was set for June 27th. The timing had to be precise to the minute. In the UK, it was 5:00 a.m., the sky just beginning to grey before sunrise. Dozens of officers in tactical gear were stacking up outside multiple addresses, preparing to breach the homes of the key players. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away in Dubai, it was 2:00 p.m. The desert sun was punishing, beating down on the port, where 2 of Wahed's associates had just arrived. They were there to meet the shipment, handle the customs, and move the goods. The contrast between the 2 scenes was cinematic. In London, the streets were silent. save for the hushed breathing of officers waiting for the go signal. In Dubai, the air was filled with the industrial clamor of cranes and trucks. The two smugglers located their container. They checked the paperwork. Everything matched. They approached the locking mechanism, likely sweating from a mix of the heat and anticipation. Back in Ilford, the police battering ram was poised inches from Wahed's front door. In Dubai, the bolt cutters snapped the seal. One of the men grabbed the heavy locking lever and heaved it upward. At that exact second, across the UK, the radio silence broke. Strike. 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 Front doors splintered inward. Armed officers flooded into hallways, shouting commands. Wahed Ysef was ripped from his sleep to find his bedroom filled with police. But in Dubai, the horror was of a different kind. The container doors swung open, the rusty hinges groaning, allowing the bright sunlight to flood the interior. The men stepped forward, ready to inspect their cargo. They stopped dead. They blinked, perhaps assuming the glare was playing tricks on their eyes. But as their vision adjusted, the reality hit them with the force of a physical blow. The container was empty. Staring into the void of that steel box, the two men in Dubai were paralyzed by a confusion that quickly curdled into panic. They stepped inside. Footsteps echoing on the bare metal floor, scanning the corners as if the massive engines might be hiding in the shadows. But there was nothing. No parts. No packing materials, just the stagnant air of a wasted voyage. They checked the exterior number again. It was the correct container. The seal had been intact. Logically, this was impossible. Had the buyer betrayed them? Had a rival gang intercepted the goods at the port? They pulled out their phones, desperate for answers, and dialed the one man who could explain this disaster, Wahed. The phone rang. And rang. Man kapo dalang gallons, kalatati voicemail, natiminti they tried Muhammad Bogi. Natiminti voicemail, happily they called the facility landline. Nothing. Lutincation, 7 calls, 7 silences. What they could not see, standing 4,000 miles away, was that while their phones were buzzing, the devices on the other end were currently being bagged as evidence by Essex Police. Wahed was not answering because he was in handcuffs. The silence from the UK was deafening, and it communicated a message more terrifying than any verbal threat. The network had not just been hit. It had been erased. The realization began to dawn on them. They were stranded in a foreign country, standing next to a documented piece of evidence that linked them directly to a crime scene back home. With few options left, they booked the first flight back to London. That 7-hour return journey must have been a psychological torture chamber. Every announcement over the intercom, every glance from a flight attendant, likely spiked their adrenaline. They were flying blind, hoping that perhaps it was just a misunderstanding. A communications blackout. But the moment they cleared customs at Heathrow and stepped into the arrivals hall, reality was waiting for them. There were no drivers to pick them up, only a reception committee of officers. The trap was finally sprung shut. The circle was complete. Fast forward 1 year to June 2024, at Chelmsford Crown Court. The swagger and arrogance of the operation were long gone, replaced by the somber reality of the dock. The judge presided over the sentencing of 8 men, outlining a conspiracy that had cost victims nearly £3 million. Wahed Ysef, the architect of the scheme, received 6 years and 1 month. His lieutenants, Bakari and Vanderberg, were handed sentences of over 4 years each. In total, the gang was sentenced to more than 36 years behind bars. The judge described the operation as highly sophisticated. But the subtext of the sentencing was clear: these men had been outplayed. The brilliance of this police operation was not just in the arrests, it was in the humiliation. By letting that empty container sail, the police engaged in psychological warfare. They allowed the criminals to invest time, money, and hope into a venture that was already dead. They let them believe they were winning until the very last second. It stripped them of the criminal mastermind illusion. They were not untouchable. They were being watched, managed, and toyed with by the very people they thought they were outsmarting. This case serves as a stark warning, not just to criminals, but to every car owner watching this. The theft of keyless vehicles is an epidemic. With a car stolen every 4 minutes in the UK alone, these gangs are opportunistic. They look for the path of least resistance. If you own a car with keyless entry, The solution is surprisingly cheap. Buy a signal blocking pouch, often called a Faraday bag. For your keys, it costs less than a lunch and effectively creates a shield that relay devices cannot penetrate. Do not let your driveway be the next target. The police won this round with a masterclass in strategy, but they can't be everywhere. Sometimes, the best defense is making sure your car simply does not listen when a thief comes calling.